Right, so the team asked me to put together a little bit of a statement of how our books are being made over at Burst. It's actually a whole process. So, and yet it's actually not that much. It's kind of a very interesting process of how we make our books that try to minimize the effort maybe in some ways, because when you make books, especially when you make children's books, what you find is that people like someone that writes one children's book, they're not usually a writer or whatever, or not of children's books per se. Usually it's like a hobby project, or it's like a vanity project. I'll make like the children's book, and if it's like a famous person, they can write it, they can maybe get it illustrated and then put it out there. Maybe it has a splash, and it's like a big to-do to get the book out there. For most people. But the problem is that in order to make an entire business out of it, or a company out of it, you can't just have one story. So the vanity project, the vanity process of having this one major book that you pour everything into, you put it out there, and this one book makes the splash. What if it doesn't? What if what if it backfires, or if it's a dud? Then the entire thing sputters. So one book can't ever be allowed, for what I'm trying to do, it can't ever be allowed to be the maker or breaker of the success of the company, right? Something else is that it's very expensive to make children's books, because you have to write it, you have to illustrate it, and that's where a lot of the dreams that people have break down. When it comes to children's media, they don't know how to make it cost less than, like, for example, say a children's book has 10 spreads. A spread is 2 pages opened up, right? So 10 of those spreads. I reached out to an illustrator recently, and I was like, hey, how much would one spread cost to illustrate? And so she's like, yeah, from $600 to $1,000, right? So you take even 600 and you put it on 10 spreads, and you get $6,000 on just illustrations alone for just one book. Then you add the cost of writing, which is an entire process of itself. The cost of printing, the cost of layout and design, and it very quickly becomes something that's so prohibitively expensive that people just can't find a way to get it started, to get going, and to make it affordable. And so, and also like stories. Where do you get the stories? How do you write them? Do you know how to write a children's story? Do you know how to, especially for our standpoint, we have a very, very high criterion of what it means to be a children's book. And I'm sure everybody says that, but for me, for us, a children's book and a high criterion means it has to have so many check marks, milestones of what it has to have, that to get all those things done, like a very positive story, a very interesting subject, a very compelling process of explaining this, what's happened in the story. Like it can't be a boring, didactic kind of like a list of things. It can't, it also can't be too simple. It needs to have a little bit of substance, a little bit of something that's interesting to read. A lot of children's stories today are very, very, very plain. Like for me, I saw a book, it had like 5 or 6 or 7 spreads, but like you open it, there's like one word on this page and then one word on this page, and you open the next spread and there's like one word and one word. And then maybe they have an illustration which can demonstrate the word or whatever, exemplify the word. But nevertheless, you just read like 10 words and you're done with the book. So how is that a children's book? It's not for me. Like my criteria are so much higher than that for what it needs to be. So writing it is no small task. Like producing the text of this thing that's both sophisticated and rich, but also simple and digestible, but also very interesting and very compelling. But it's not silly and like pointless, but there's a meaning behind it. There's a very purposeful and very useful message that's going to help the child expand their mind, help them grow, provide them with role models, provide them with an internal sense of life, of hopefulness and optimism. Like that's a lot. You have to be almost a PhD in storytelling, which is not even a thing, but But if it were a thing, you'd have to have that to write a story for us. And so when you think of all the things that have to go into a story, into a children's book, the text, the illustrations, the overall process that I began in the beginning of explaining how the process is what's so daunting for most people, and how like usually if it's a famous person that produces one children's book, usually it's like a big to-do, like it's like the one project for the year. You make a children's book and it's like, here it is. And meanwhile, for me, like I'm like, yeah, I need you to make 30 more of those in the same time period. And so you like the process itself is very daunting for most people. So if you want to be a successful children's book writer or author or issuer, you have to solve those three things at least. The process has to be very nimble, much more than people realize. The illustrations have to be a lot more. You have to find a way to make the illustrations more affordable, much more than sort of just the normal market rate for these things. And you have to find a way to get the stories that are exactly what you want, but who's going to write those today? Like, there's so many different things, but you have to solve all those things in order to, in our case, to aspire for the very highest level of excellence that we want to achieve in our content, and want to sort of help provide for the kids and the families. And so, long story short, without spilling too much, that's basically what Burst has been able to achieve, is to solve those three things: how to get the story, how to get the illustration, and how to make the process very accessible.